Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Katie Flowers, and I represent the Center for Community Engagement and Service Learning at the colleges. And on behalf of our center, the Finger Lakes Institute, thank you, Adam, the Boys and Girls Club of Geneva, and Geneva Reads, thank you, Director Jane Gerling, we could not be more thrilled to collectively and collaboratively host our accomplished, distinguished speaker tonight. He is a community capacity builder and an inspiring person that I had the pleasure of having lunch with today. And I know it's going to be a thoughtful and thought-filled presentation. And because we are collaborating with Geneva Reads as part of the Geneva Reads Month programming, I thought that it would be appropriate to mention that this is our last week of programming with the Seed folks. And I'd be happy to raffle off this copy. And with an admitted bias towards my students, I guess the question would be, do you know when the next day of service is? April 14th. Way to go, Tiffany Mitchell. So it's a wonderful book about a community garden in Ohio and how a community can come together, and it's a cathartic experience for all. But here to more formally introduce Professor Cahn is a local real estate, small business attorney, a friend, a neighbor, and a champion of our wonderful community of Geneva, New York, Mark Venuti. Thank you.
Katie. Welcome, everybody. It's really a privilege for me to introduce Edgar Cahn. I have been, over the past 30 plus years, his student, his lawyer, and his compatriot in a number of escapades. This is the latest one, but allow me to introduce him for a moment. Edgar Cahn is a PhD and a JD from Yale. He's currently a distinguished professor of law at the University of the District of Columbia School of Law. He's the co-chair of Time Banks USA and the co-founder, with his late wife, Jean Camper Cahn, of the National Legal Services Program. This is a program that provides civil legal services to people who cannot afford an attorney. It was an outgrowth, one of the programs of the War on Poverty of the 60s and 70s. He also co-founded with his late wife the Antioch School of Law, which is my alma mater, and how we met. And Dr. Cahn is regarded as a founder of poverty law and a pioneer of clinical legal education. He's the creator of time dollars and time banking, which is a unique tax-exempt local currency that we're going to discuss tonight. It's utilized at this time in 40 states and 32 nations, now including Geneva, New York, which is not a nation, but yeah. His formulation of co-production as a partnership between the core and monetary economies that transforms clients from passive consumers to active co-producers of outcomes is emerging as a leading framework for social change. His other initiatives include the Time Dollar Youth Court, Care Banks, and the Racial Justice Initiative. In 2008, he was chosen as an Ashoka Fellow to pioneer an adaptation of time banking to provide a form of long-term care insurance with time dollars earned helping others. He was part of a team led by Christine Gray that partnered with former inmates to develop the National Homecomers Academy, a vision of re-entry enabling homecomers to define themselves as community builders on a journey of service and learning. His new Racial Justice Initiative unveiled a breakthrough legal theory and strategy to dismantle structural racism in juvenile justice and child welfare. Dr. Cahn's works include Hunger USA, Our Brother's Keeper, The Indian in White America, Time Dollars, No More Throwaway People, and Priceless Money. Dr. Cahn is one of the foremost thinkers and doers in social justice and system change of our time. Please join me in welcoming him to the podium.
It's exciting for me to be here. It feels like a kind of second home. You know, when I was in legal trouble or needed legal help because of a heart attack, I knew whom to pick as a lawyer. He was maybe only a year or two out, but I knew he was competent, and not only competent, but a fighter. And Mark represented me after I had this heart attack that blew away 60% of my heart. And there was a question of whether or not that was due to the workload I was carrying or whether it was simply a genetic condition that, and Mark was able to document that given a 7-day week and an 18-hour day, that maybe it had something to do with the work I was doing. But lying there in the hospital bed, I have to tell you I was receiving very fine care, but I didn't like just being a patient. Because for me, being alive meant making a difference in other people's lives. And I thought of, I don't like being useless. That was 1980, and we were declaring a lot of other people useless. And I thought, why can't we find a way to enlist people whom the market may have no use for to begin to address the social problems that we have? And that put me on this quest. Some people ask me, when did I start and what prompted me to start looking for time banking or thinking about it? And that was one point. I have to tell you that probably the real point was a little bit earlier. You see, I had a genetic advantage in thinking about time banking. I had a twin sister, so I never even had the womb to myself. And the world never revolved around me individually. She was 15 minutes my elder, and boy did I know that. And I think that I was clear that I arrived in the world 9 months in debt, and I've been going downhill ever since. So the notion that we need each other was there pretty much from the start. And I've had to learn it and relearn it many times. I remember when I first started thinking and first wrote the first book on time banking, I sent the draft to my sister, and she called me up and said, Edgar, I'm not really qualified to read this. I said, that's all right, I'm not qualified to write it. Because I'm not an economist. I was when you get a doctorate in literature writing about Wordsworth, you're not necessarily poised to talk about social policy, and when you're a lawyer, you know how to scare people about the risks they're taking, but you don't necessarily know how to say walk out on space and try and figure out a whole new way of thinking about things. But I have to tell you that in 1980, we had seen a lot of programs stop and fold because of cutbacks. But I wasn't willing to live with simply abandoning, frankly, the quest for social justice that had come out of the civil rights movement and come out of all the efforts we had made in the war on poverty. Now, when you give any kind of an address, people remember some things if you can give them something to remember. My rule of thumb is people can remember no more than 3 things. And so I'm going to give you 3 words, which will be my 3 propositions that I want you to think about. The first word is pizza, okay? The second word is windows. And the third word is Prius. That's that hybrid car that Toyota makes.
Oh.
Okay, got it, got it. And the reason I say that is, the first proposition is that I think we need to learn the public policy and in the human services world that we're not in the delivery business. We do not deliver pizza. You can deliver pizza, you can deliver packages, but there's a passage I read about why systems fail that was written about some systems in England, and said one can deliver a parcel or pizza, but one cannot deliver health or education or community. Every public service requires that the customer be an active agent in the production of the desired outcomes, whether it's an education initiative or a healthcare initiative or a community building initiative. You fail unless you can engage the so-called consumers as co-producers of the outcomes. And if citizens, like students, are treated merely as consumers, they have only two functions: to consume and to complain. Anybody who is taught knows you get a dose of both. And sometimes the consumption doesn't work because there's another process that has to go on. I think I deliver good classes until I read the final exams, and then it occurs to me there's another process that goes on. I'm saying that all of us who are concerned about social problems need to understand that whatever we bring to those problems by way of understanding and expertise, if the transactions by which we deliver that knowledge or share that knowledge do not generate active engagement that enlists the listener, like you, as a co-participant and co-producer of a new set of outcomes, all you've been is entertainment. And one of the reasons why I'm hoping that people will be interested in this is there will be further meetings to actually put this to work and to actually begin to think, how can this be used, these ideas, to actually address the concerns that you have? Because everybody in this room is here because there might just be an idea that would enable you to make a difference. And I think all of us have a hunger and a desire to feel that we matter, that we want our lives to matter, that we want the time spent on this planet to leave it a little bit better than we found it. And maybe it's not just what we do, but maybe it's also what we can set in motion while we do it. And this is about setting in motion a process that respects and engages everybody. Now, when I say you cannot deliver community, I'm very specific about what that community means. I was reading about the amount of labor and work that is not part of the GDP. There was one review that said the value of unpaid household work, going back to 1998 was a study, was roughly $1.9 trillion. That's 1/4 the size of the whole GDP, but it doesn't count, right? The national value of informal care given by families, kinfolk, friends, to keep seniors out of nursing homes when it was valued at $10 an hour, which you can't buy a homemaker for, was in 2002, $253 billion, And the latest figures put it at $350 to $400 billion in just 1 year in just this nation. That's 6 times what's spent on homemaker services by Medicaid and Medicare. So we're not talking about a minor economic level of activity. Nobel Prize winners Gary Becker and the MacArthur Genius Award went to Nancy Folger. Both estimate that at least 40% of all economic activity takes place outside of the market economy, the monetary economy, in what I call the core economy. So we're steering our public policies with 40% of the map torn off as if it doesn't exist. That's probably not, if you wanted to get from here to Albany and 40% of the map was torn off, you might not know exactly how to steer. I don't think we know how to steer this economic ship that we're part of. And I think we've got to begin rethinking how we steer it, and that's what this is about. The second proposition that I want to advance is about Windows. Windows is the operating system that I'm talking about. I'm talking about Windows, the operating system, but for the Mac users, I'll give you equal respect and simply say, you can't fix the operating system by simply adding on a new program. You've got to go into the operating system, which means you've got to go into that core economy and you've got to be part of the upgrade or the retooling of a whole new operating system. The operating system that we have had in the past and the function of that operating system was these minor things like raising children, keeping families strong, making neighborhoods vibrant, turning out voters for elections, holding officials accountable, fighting for social justice, trying to keep the planet sustainable, nothing of economic significance, you understand. In any event, those functions, to the extent that we entrusted them to the old core operating system, were to a degree that we never fully acknowledged, carried out in significant measure by women, by immigrants who had come to this country as nannies or in other roles, by African Americans and by minority groups who raised our children, who took care of the elderly, and who did a whole number of things that we just took for granted. And as we move into a new era with these values like equality and respect and opportunity, we're going to have to design an operating system that enlists all and values all. And I've shared with people that that's going to involve very different folks doing very different things. The workforce that is going to have to raise our children is going to have to be a new kind of extended family, because in whole portions of the city, in Washington, D.C., in the areas I work, I looked at all of the records of all of the kids who had gone through youth court. I'll describe that a little later. But of those 870 kids that year, the files that I looked at, only 14 of them were growing up in a household with 2 adults. So what does that mean about family and family support? And the mothers come home because they've been, if they're on TANF, they've been required to be out there working. And they come home, and what time do they have to talk to their kid about homework, about growing up, about peer conflicts, about hormones and sex, about all of the kind, about drugs? They're exhausted. And so if these kids are looking for support and looking for any kind of guidance and even any kind of listening to what's bothering them, where are they going to get it from? Well, we know the drug dealers will give it to them. We know the gangs will give them support. And we know the gangs will make it safe for them and protect them, they think at least. But who else will be there? And those are the kinds of questions we're asking in every major city. I've been looking at school failure rates and school reading rates recently, and in Washington, D.C., when I looked at third grade reading rates, in most of the elementary schools in Washington, D.C., between 15 and 25% of the kids were at third grade reading level, which means between 75 and 85% of those kids are going into fourth grade not being able to read at the reading level they need in order to be learning in fourth grade. And then when you start looking at how many graduate from high school and what the reading levels is there, only 45 to 55% of the kids who enroll in high school graduate. And of those, most of them are at 5th to 6th grade reading levels. And that's the workforce that our school system is producing. We have similar problems around health care for the chronic, for the elderly. You know, we're now going through a national debate, but we don't have a health care system that delivers health, and you can't deliver health. The baby boomers are reaching 65 at the rate of 8,000 a day. Now they don't admit, I haven't met any baby boomers who admit that they are aging, but I do know that they admit they have elder parents who may have a problem. And I do know that simply the pills that a doctor gives you and the surgery he can provide will not make you healthy. It will not enable you to live a healthy, vibrant life. I had to learn to get up in the morning and get on a treadmill and get on an elliptical and do the exercise. And that's what, and it's that kind of engagement. And most people don't do good things for themselves, but you can enlist them to do good things for others, to help others, and in a way, and in the process, they'll begin to live a different life. But I'm simply saying the workforce we need to preserve health, to build community, to educate our kids, is going to have to be a different workforce. I'm thinking of one worker, a 5-year-old girl I saw with pigtails in a housing complex that had previously, before we introduced time banking, been a war zone, and it literally had war zone, and time credits then were used. They earned them mainly by using phones to tell people when the shooting had stopped and when it was safe to come back. And the other way in which the time credits were earned and spent were repasses at funerals because of the shootings. Once we negotiated a truce and people were earning time credits, I saw this 5-year-old with pigtails go up to a former gang leader who was about 6 feet tall with gold teeth and chains and tattoos, and she went up to him and said, "We have trash cans here and we use them." Not work I won't willingly do, or at least do with a little bit of trepidation, but she was earning time credits because she wanted to get dance lessons. And I'm simply saying we need a different workforce to build community there, and that's the kind, and that 5-year-old is part of that workforce. Now, I'm going to simply say that if we're going to build a new core economy, and if we think of that as a new operating system, then we're going to have to ask everybody to contribute, and we're going to have to find ways in which we can value their work. And that means that we're going to have to figure out how do we honor labor for which there is no minimum wage. I'm talking about caring labor that it takes to raise kids and build families. I'm talking about civic labor that you're here to promote, that the kind of engagement it will take to build a different kind of community. I'm talking about the social justice labor it takes to deal with discrimination and to get the civil rights movement going. As best I know, nobody was paid minimum wage to do those sit-ins. And as best I know, nobody was paid minimum wage to protest apartheid. But some of the things we're proudest of was done by unpaid citizen labor and citizens engaging, feeling they could make a difference. And you're here tonight, and I don't know as you're being paid minimum wage to listen to me, but I suspect you're not. And I just think that this is the kind of engagement, this is the kind of labor, and my only feeling is we need it to be participatory. So I'm going to move along. But this is true also about the environmental labor it will take to preserve the beautiful land that's around you, and to preserve and to try and reclaim clean water and clean air. All of that is going to take labor. It doesn't just happen. And now, that said, I'm simply going to say that time banking provides simply a medium of exchange that we can use to compensate for, generate, and track that labor. Now, a medium of exchange, like money, puts supply, labor, or resources together with demand, need. That's the function of labor. That's the function of that medium of exchange. Some of you may have heard of another medium of exchange that we use called grades, academic credits. Yes, we've heard of those. And degrees. That's the currency used by academia to promote learning, to get degrees, to get jobs. So we use a second medium of exchange. You know, there was education long before there were grades. I know it's a surprise. There was actually, way back when, before there were grades, there was actually education going on. But you've seen what that medium of exchange has done to build institutions, to accumulate knowledge, to create professional careers and career lines. That's what a medium of exchange does. We have had no medium of exchange to build and strengthen the vibrant volunteering that goes into civic work that nonprofits do, the kind of medium of exchange that promotes and gives shape and fashion and power and will generate new kinds of institutions, new kinds of social inventions here when it comes to the world of civic engagement. And we're here to say, isn't it about time we had a medium of exchange that enabled us to fashion new streams of energy to address civic problems and to build the kind of community that we all want to see, and that in fact, that in many ways, Geneva represents. So you haven't lost it, but the question of how you strengthen it and how you build it is what we're here really to talk about. Now, just a couple of examples, because most people, when they've heard about time banking, think about you help her, she helps him, he helps her, she helps me, and they think in terms of individual transactions. But I'm here to tell you that that's the hardest thing to get going in time banking, because nobody in this room grows up liking to ask for help. You do it yourself. You're taught to do it yourself. You're taught to be self-sufficient. And in this country particularly, you're taught that you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and asking for help isn't something you're supposed to do. And we have to learn a new social etiquette that says maybe we need each other. Because at the beginning I used to say, well, nobody can earn time credits if nobody will accept help. The fastest way to turn off a volunteer who signs up to volunteer is not to use them. They feel rejected, they feel devalued. So if you're going to start a time bank program, you better have a way of getting people engaged fast, within usually 48 to 72 hours is the rule of thumb that we've developed. Well, there are places that need people, and the question is, how does one begin to fashion new kinds of clusters of time banking that will go on and that will sort of sustain themselves? We've had some examples of particular concerns. One around how do people get some respite if they're dealing with cancer recovery, or how do people get a place to drop their kids if they're attending evening classes at the community college? How do those women who have to log in hours looking for jobs in order to get their TANF payments, where do they find 3 hours of babysitting to take care of their children? And those are kinds of cluster needs, which you can see, those are regular, ongoing needs that would sustain and generate a flow of both time credits earned and time credits spent. Now, that said, let me just give you some examples, because I'm hoping that what will come out of here is part of a shared national dialogue where you'll be creating your own social inventions. So that in one place in England, they said most child care, frankly, is babysitting or television watching. Wouldn't it be exciting if it actually were child development instead of babysitting? And so with appropriate licensing and so forth and training, every home-based child care program in that city had some folks who were co-paying for it with time credits earned, first taking some classes on child development, and then adding in some extra hours at the end of the day and Saturday morning so that the child care was in fact extended in time. I've shared with people that we dealt with special education needs in 27 schools in Chicago by having 5th and 6th graders, which I think you have a supply of, tutoring the 1st and 2nd graders. And in fact, some of the 5th and 6th graders themselves were special ed kids, but by the time they finished teaching the 1st and 2nd graders, we had eliminated the need for special education in those schools. I've shared with people that we created a youth court in Washington, D.C., and now that's spread to other cities, where the teenagers who get into trouble, the most at-risk ones, earn time credits on the jury, talking to other kids and saying, I did that too, and that's why I'm on this jury. And by the way, don't do it, and we're sentencing you A, to community service, B, to writing an essay on what you want to be in 5 years, and C, to apologize to your mother right now, and you don't leave this courtroom until you hug her in front of us. And oh, by the way, you're also sentenced to 10 weeks of jury duty. That is now handling between 65 and 70% of all nonviolent crime in Washington, D.C. So that's another social invention. In Rhode Island, parents whose kids were going to be institutionalized because they were either schizophrenic or bipolar could use time dollars to create, time banking to create an extended family. Because their kids could drive them crazy, but they could cope with other people's kids more readily, and their kids could help them cope with other kids. And so what they began to find was by creating a new kind of extended family, most of these were single moms, but by creating a new kind of extended family, they were able to save the state millions of dollars of the state funds, the Time Bank Network and the Parent Support Network in parent support centers throughout Rhode Island. Where the parents and the kids, in fact, create a new kind of family, and where kids now who have severe emotional distress come and parents bring them, and that begins to be the sort of seedbed and incubator of all kinds of new community building efforts. In both Miami and in a place in England, in London, called Russian Green, it's used, time banking is used for all of the patients who are now on medication for hypertension or depression or other kinds of mental illness, and they have found consistently that those who participate in the time bank, and the doctors actually in England actually write a prescription to earn time credits, and they send them to the nurse who in fact becomes the time bank broker. And the studies show that there's a significant drop in the need for medication, and improvement correlates directly with the level of participation in the time bank. In Vermont, we're trying a new experiment with time banking where elders earn time credits and pay them as premiums for a kind of long-term care insurance to provide the informal care that families used to provide. I'm saying this because I think that these are illustrations of ways in which people brought together with a community of interest around reading or learning or care or mental health. In Oakland, the public health department of Alameda County invested in time banking to stop shootings and killings and attacks between the older black residents and the new coming Hispanic residents. And so they invested in what had been a previously African-American church. They invested in a half-time a Hispanic coordinator and an African-American coordinator. And they gradually, and now they've taken over a variety of functions, but I'm simply going to say after 3 years, violence has dropped significantly in that neighborhood, whereas it's gone up in every other neighborhood in Oakland during the same period of time. So that's paying off because people are learning how to trust each other. But the joy and the excitement and the sense of, hey, we're here to build community is just very powerful, and it's really contagious when you go see it. I'm simply really want to open this for questions rather than me, because nothing about adult learning tells me that one person talking at people leaves any learning. I'll simply say that the last word I told you was the Prius, and it's going to take a thin stream of money as well as a large stream of volunteer energy, psychic energy. But we can build new kinds of social institutions if we put out some money for the small infrastructure and staffing it takes. And in Washington, D.C., the youth court, I have to acknowledge, takes some pizza parties and so forth. You know? So I'm not saying that money is going to vanish and that we don't need some money, but maybe we could get a return on our investment in the institutions that we do have if we began to really say, how do we co-produce and how do we enlist the very persons who are the consumers of those services as co-producers. I want to share with you in sort of closing a friend who heard this sent to me a Sufi poem that I think sort of captures the spirit of what I'm saying. It says, I asked for strength, and God gave me difficulties to make me strong. I asked for wisdom, and God gave me problems to learn to solve. I asked for courage, and God gave me dangers to overcome. I asked for love, and God gave me people to help. I received nothing I wanted. I received everything I needed. I think we have what we need right here, and I'm very excited to be able to join with you exploring what that would mean. Thank you.
Sure, we have some time for questions and answers. Please raise your hand if you have a question. I'm sorry, I don't have a microphone, so if you could project your voice because we are audio taping for the Time Bank website in Geneva.
Yes.
Discuss it.
Oh, sorry. Somebody had a question?
Yeah.
I just had a practical question. How do you keep track of, who keeps track of the hours? The time bank, or how does that work?
It now works because the software that's available is open source, it's on the internet, and any member who has a computer can simply go to his or her page and see what that account is, list the things you're willing to do, sign up to list the things you're willing to do, sign up, once you describe what that page is, that page looks like.
We have a website, we're tied into the Times Bank USA, it's Geneva Times Bank. Does that work? It's on the little green brochure. So you go in, you see different categories. You can say what you're interested in, so do it. And I put down, I would give an hour of legal services to them. I would watch a child. I would give a ride to someone who needs a ride. I think I listed about 4 different things. So as people get into the bank, and more people do, then we start exchanging children for an hour.
And you
I've
give
been
them the
back
time for the transaction, and the recipient is automatically debited in their account. And if there's a complaint about that, then that goes up to whoever's sort of management or coordinator who's available to correct that.
Nobody has any money to begin with, though. How do you start it? I mean, somebody has a need. They don't have any money. They've not really done anything for anybody, and they can't do something for anybody because those people don't have money to pay them yet. I mean, you have to capitalize this bank somehow to get them going.
Different programs address that in different ways. Some automatically say, if you come to the orientation, you automatically earn 2 credits. Others say, as they do when they send you these Visa cards, you start off with a line of credit of 5 or 10 hours. And at the point where you use those up, it behooves you to pay the debt off so that you can keep earning. But so different people, some partner with some programs that agree to allow people to cash in their time credits for a reward that they set up, like a group movie, like a trip in the minibus that the organization owns, like a special set of lessons for people who might want web design or karate or whatever. So different groups, in effect, generate lines of credit as a way of producing and stimulating engagement in activities. Is that? It's a good question. It's a very good question. And the beauty of it is it invites different approaches to be used. And we could be crediting everybody here with the hour or 2 that you spent as part of your orientation. And for anybody who wants to join, because this is part of the orientation. If the group decides that's a way to start.
I have to say in the beginning that we're sending around, and if you're interested in this, you can give us your email, or phone, or whatever that you have. We're building this now, so these questions need to be answered. 10 others or 20 others. And so we'll be meeting again in the next week or two. We'll invite anybody to help us continue the journey here, figuring out what's our project, or how do you start, those kinds of things. We encourage anybody to get involved. We have a group that's been meeting, we've been having fun, potluck dinners and stuff like that. And one thing that I've been with Edgar, we've had a couple stops today that I really like, because a formulation that he made that rang with me this morning was, in a sense, we are building our family out. You can do anything for a family member. And as these connections are made, basically what you're doing is the boundary of your family is getting larger and larger and more permeable. And so that that's how it builds community. We get to know what each other needs. We work out these things. We start, everybody wins.
It's a peculiar world that we're talking about. If you had a distant relative call you and say, my son or daughter is coming to town and they stay with you, you would probably say, yeah, fine, even if you didn't know them that well, or they're somehow related. I do not think you would get an MPI check. I do not think you would take out high-risk insurance and say you're family. And so we're trying to say, how do we rebuild that sense of spirit? Yes, there is bookkeeping involved. Yes, in effect, we're printing new kinds of money. Yes, the numbers are important as a way of beginning to generate some sense of the magnitude and the significance of the effort. But for instance, in Florida, where the Florida legislature in the early years passed a law authorizing and sponsoring what were then called service credit programs, and said they would try to say we would guarantee those. When the state back goes up, because the state of Missouri had passed the first law actually guaranteeing the credits for respite care as a way of reducing nursing home care. The Attorney General of the state of Florida said that means every good deed is a contingent liability of the state of Florida, that we could go bankrupt if too many people help each other. That's the kind of thinking we don't really need. But, yeah.
Would you be willing to speak into the microphone
Surely.
so that I think that'll help people hear.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, it's such a great story. I just want everybody to hear it.
I have another question. It's related to my first. I was going to ask you, you have all these banks in various countries and states and cities. I was just curious about how much money you have in circulation now. Do you have some idea of the total amount of money or hours that's been created by this? Now, that then prompted another question, which is you may still give a few people a few hours here and there, to start off with a orientation session or something like that. But over time, there has to continue to be some other way of putting money in, because if you start off with, say, 500 hours somehow that you give out, there's always going to be only 500 hours. Unless there's still some other way of getting money into the system. And that's why my first question, which was how much, I had this model that the money was accumulated, just like in ordinary banks. These banks get bigger, they have more and more money. And, so I don't see how that you can answer that question, because maybe your banks don't have much hours stored up.
Well, I was looking at a report just from visiting nurses in New York, which has been running this for about 4 years now. And their sheet indicated that 143,000 hours had been earned and logged in. A fair number of them have been spent, so that in terms of the volume of the system, you can say, well, if I've spent everything I've earned, my balance is zero. But what they're conscious of is, one, how many hours have been earned, but also how much help has been received. So they regard they don't view the negative as a negative, they view the negative as that represents an incredible volume of help received and accepted by people who before were strangers.
But if you do work and it's banked into your account, the person for whom you've done the work, there must be a negative in their account. Or if there's not, they are getting services without having to pay for it. So
no, you're right. As between, if
so the net money must be zero. I get credited with 10 hours because I've done this work. The other person who forgot to work didn't have any money, so they're negative 10. They have to pay that off sometime, unless there's still just zero net there. Right?
Okay, well, in theory, the whole system ought to balance out at zero. Anybody who looks at, let's say, nonprofit balance and loss sheets sees your assets are supposed to equal your liabilities. But that doesn't mean you've done nothing, and it doesn't mean that value has not been created. And what we're looking at is, what's the volume of service created? What's the volume of value received? You can say that given the number of hours that kids have earned on the jury, and given what they've been able to spend it for and redeem it for, nothing's happened. But if in fact crime is going down significantly and recidivism is going down significantly, people are aware that it looks like you've got a different kind of an economy. If the economy is, the same would be true of our own economy in some sense. If we didn't have interest generating money based upon the growth of money. And I think what we're saying is that maybe we've got to start rethinking what our measures of growth and prosperity are. And maybe the volume of circulation of those credits of earning from you and spending with him and how that goes around is in fact a significant measure of the economic health of the community. The balance may be always theoretically zero, but that doesn't mean you're where you started. Yes?
In order to bring in revenue, I guess, in terms of hours, are there like outside programs where you don't necessarily help someone who's with time bank, but like say if Geneva's holding an event and they're in need of more volunteers, is there a way for someone to go out and get more hours so then they can have more hours to spend
Well, what has happened is that this operates as a catalyst to bring groups working together. So if there's a group you want to volunteer for, let's just say there's a governance group of the time bank, and they'll say, how will you give back? We're willing to send you some folk volunteers to deal with your needs, but they're going to generate a certain number of hours to help your organization with its mission. How are you willing to contribute to community building in return? And that may take the form of hours, or it may take the form of, as it often takes, the following forms. One is, we'll try and recruit our members in return, so the organization will make an effort to reciprocate by getting more people to join the time bank. Second, we'll sponsor events that people can cash. We use our resources. We've got an auditorium, or we've got a minibus, or we've got some folks who are specialists in grantsmanship. We'll contribute in some way to the growth and development of your organization. And so that then brings that organization into the fold and makes it part of a consortium of time bank, of a consortium that is running the time bank. And the more that can happen, you can see where faith-based organizations might want their congregations to function as an extended family, but members of that family might want to help people from another congregation. And so it begins to snowball in ways, and that's what we've seen, that it does begin to snowball, and that's why Visiting Nurses has all these businesses, and the businesses themselves will say, well, we want to show that we're sponsoring this kind of community building, so we will, in New York City, we will give discounts of difference for any time bank member of a significant sort, as our way of saying, well, we will sponsor in England and in Wales, they will sponsor different social events. So there's a whole schedule of social events sponsored by organizations that people come to, and it's their way of saying, you can cash in your time credits there. What happened in Wales was they charged for those events. You could pay either in time credits for, let's say, a 2-hour concert would be 2 time credits or X number of pounds sterling. And when the people who were paying the pounds sterling said, where do I earn those time credits? Volunteering shot up by over 500% in 6 months. So we think it's a stimulus for building community and for stimulating volunteering that is valued by both by the nonprofit world and by the local government. The local government now is asking the time bank to take on the preservation of trails and forests there, and they in turn are providing funding for the staff of the time bank as their way of saying this is the most important thing. This is an investment we're prepared to back. So I've got to tell you that we're making it up as we go along. That there's no that it's not a cookie cutter magic formula, but it starts from the premise that there is vast untapped capacity in every human being and in community. And if we're going to build the kind of world we want, we better figure out a way to enlist it in ways that turn people on and that combine self-interest bluntly, so you earn credits that you can spend with a sense of intrinsic reward. I'm making a difference, and that makes me feel good. Yes?
If this is viewed as a currency of sorts, obviously, how can you exchange currency? So say the time bank in Geneva wants to somehow work with the time bank in Ithaca. Have exchanges like that before?
It's done, right now, it's done on a phone call basis, but time credits earned in one community have been universally honored by time credits by time banks in other communities, with a sense of we're extended family. Now, people have been really good at figuring out that this could create all kinds of problems. And they say, so what? We're not at the scale, right? I mean, if all the people in New York have grandparents in Florida, so they're earning them in New York, but they're being spent in Florida by their grandparents, that's going to create some problems for the time banks in Florida. If that paralyzed us that would, I mean, those are the kinds of questions that came up when we started, and we'll say, and our answer has been, we'll figure it out as we go along, and there may be a cap on how many can be honored from different time banks, and our job will be first to make things happen, and second to solve the problems as they arise. I mean, it's not a satisfactory answer to some people, but to other people I would simply say, that's life. If before we did anything, we had to figure out all the unknown consequences and risks we were taking, we'd probably never get out of bed in the morning.
So I think we have time for one more question, and then Professor Cahn will probably agree to stay for a minute or two, and Ann Vandermeulen, who are our guru for the website, could stay and answer specific questions too. So I see one more hand up. Thought I did. I stifled your creativity. Oh no. Go ahead, please.
So it sounds like what you're saying is even if there's not a positive balance in account, there's a net value. In fact, a great net value. And that instead of, in starting a bank, instead of going to capital investors, like you go to places where there's a lot of need, essentially, and untapped resources. So we come from a town, we come from Bath, about an hour from here. There's a lot of need, and thinking about it, it's brilliant. It's like exactly where we should go is to the VA and to the senior centers and where places people, yeah, they have a lot of need, but they have a lot of untapped resources.
I think that requires a different way of looking at the people who have the needs. I've talked with veterans. Veterans want to go back to their units, and many of them are disabled and can't. So I'm saying, your useful life is not over. We need you now, and we need to create a veterans transportation corps, because you and somebody else could, in every neighborhood that I know in different cities, there's a critical need for transportation that people can rely on. Would you be willing to think of how the mission of rebuilding community as your kind of national service can be extended, because this community needs you, and we think that can help significantly in terms of the syndromes that folks come back with from battle. The same is true with the elderly. We know that, to the extent that they engage in time banking, we've had an elder plan health service in New York say that this radically reduced the length of stay in hospitals because there was a support system at home. In North Dakota, it's used in rural areas to deal with both dialysis and chemotherapy, and it's the form of transport that's used, because we're talking about large rural areas. So we begin to understand that if we can't engage people, the money isn't going to be there to solve the problems. There are two questions that usually come up, and I probably should address, and will sooner or later come up here when people get serious. One is, why isn't this taxable water? And the second is, what about liability? And I think it's worth putting those on the table so you've at least heard my answers. On the IRS, we have been very careful to say two things about time banking. One is, there's an obligation to pay back, but it's only a moral obligation. It's not a legal obligation. The IRS does not acknowledge the existence of moral obligations, so it can't tax something that doesn't exist. And they also are aware both of the charitable purpose and of the fact that this does not look like a commercial barter system, because we rejected commercial pricing. So we have consistently had rulings that said this is not commercial barter, and the very first ruling was about how this fulfills a critical need that's a conventional charitable need, which is keeping seniors out of nursing homes. And also, if we were trying to avoid taxes, we wouldn't put the software up in open source so the IRS can look at it as well as everybody else. Now, there will be tricky problems that we haven't solved yet as we get to the relationship of time banking to HIPAA and to rights of privacy and so forth. And different people are trying to find different ways in which that software can interface with health records or with education records or with children's records in school with their privacy concerns. And we're solving those one step at a time, and different law schools have jumped in to say we'll make that a project. But right now, I'll simply say that so long as you're clear that your purpose is either an educational purpose to educate people about a new kind of civic engagement, or a charitable purpose to deal with specific conventional charitable problems like dealing with juvenile delinquency or education or health care, those have been adequate to deal with the IRS. The liability question is twofold, because some programs do criminal checks, some don't. In the neighborhoods I'm working with, everybody's got a criminal record because the police have done what they've done. And 75% of the kids even have records if one was allowed to go into their records. And so the question becomes, what's the process by which we can learn how to trust each other again? We say very bluntly, if the law says when child care is involved or elder care is involved, you got to have a check, then we astonish them and say maybe you should obey the law. But we also say that even those formal checks don't necessarily provide the kind of safety. And some groups say we won't let you in as a member until you've gone through orientation and had a face-to-face interview. And we won't send you on assignments alone until you've been to at least a couple of birthday parties during the month, so that you're now part of family. And we won't even allow you to put your picture up, some of them say, on the website until you put an icon up there, but you can't put up your picture because we don't want people saying, "Oh, she's pretty. I think I'll go after her," or they're elderly. Maybe I can abuse them in some way. So groups are using this as a tool to shape community, and the good thing is that we haven't had, we've only been going now for about 30 years, but there have got to be better, faster ways if you're going to rip people off for money than to rob a time bank. It just doesn't look like the big bonanza. And so far there's been a sort of self-selection that says, hey, and I can't tell you frankly that all of the people who join time banks in some of these communities are angels or became angels, because I know too much about some of them. But I do know that they have said, to live in this community, I will play by the rules with my family. Strangers, that's a different question, but I've made a commitment, and it's in my interest to make sure that I can spend the time credits. And so we've had a remarkable sense of well-being come out of this in communities that are supposedly plagued with violence. Thank you so very much.
We're glad to know that you considered this your home, and we certainly hope you'll return. But of course, you couldn't depart without a copy of the Geneva Reads Community Read and a copy of the Finger Lakes, because of what you've done to inspire in us untapped potential and the capacity to build our community to be even more amazing than it already is. So thank you for coming to our community.